The child was not supposed to be in the boardroom. That much was clear from the way 12 of South Korea's most powerful executives had stopped mid-sentence, mid-breath, mid-everything, and turned to stare at the small girl standing in the center of the room with a sketchbook tucked under her arm and absolutely no awareness that she had done anything wrong. Yoon Da-on saw her from the head of the table. He stopped talking. In 14 years of running the Yoon Group, Da-on had never stopped talking mid-sentence in a board meeting. His executives knew this. They felt the silence land and looked at their chairman and found something on his face that none of them had ever seen before. Something unguarded and vast and completely beyond his control. And they looked back at the child to understand why. The child had turned toward the door, looking for whoever she had wandered away from. That was when the room understood. The jaw, the eyes, the exact, unmistakable angle of the nose. The senior executive to Daeon's left leaned toward the man beside him and said it low and certain, barely above a breath. "That's his face." The words didn't need to travel far. They moved through the room the way true things did, quietly, completely, leaving no space for argument. Da-on did not correct him. He could not have spoken if he tried. The door opened wider, and a woman stepped through, breathless professional armor slightly dented, a burnt orange folder pressed against her chest and eyes that found the child first, and then, with the particular dread of someone who already sensed the temperature of a room had changed, found Daeon. Taylor Andre had not changed. That was the first thing he thought, which was not a rational thought for a man standing in front of his entire board, but rationality had left the building approximately 30 seconds ago. She was exactly as he remembered, that precise, self-contained presence, the kind of woman who walked into rooms and immediately understood the geometry of them. She was looking at him the way she had looked at him once before, a long time ago, across a hotel bar counter at 2 in the morning, like she was deciding something. Then, her expression closed. Professional, controlled. She reached her daughter and took her hand. "I'm so sorry." Her voice was steady in a way that cost her something. She wondered, "I'm so sorry for the interruption, we'll get out of your—" She made herself look up. Their eyes met. 6 years collapsed into a single breath. The small girl, his daughter, something in Daeon's chest said, with a certainty that needed no confirmation, looked up at him with frank, unfiltered assessment. She studied him the way children studied things they found genuinely interesting, without pretense or performance. Then she said, with the complete confidence of a 6-year-old who had never once been made to feel small, "You have my face." The room cleared in under 2 minutes. 12 executives gathered tablets and folders, with the quiet efficiency of people who understood that what was happening had nothing to do with them. They filed out in a single careful stream, some looking, most choosing not to. The door closed with a soft, final click. 3 people remained. Daeon had not moved from the head of the table. Taylor had not moved from the spot where she'd found Zoe. The child herself had settled cross-legged on the floor beside one of the vacated chairs and opened her sketchbook with the focused calm of someone who understood that adults sometimes needed a moment and was content to wait them out. The silence lasted longer than it should have. It was Daeon who broke it. His voice was careful, the voice of a man choosing each word the way you chose footing on uncertain ground. "She's mine." Not a question. Not quite a statement. The words of a man testing the floor, making sure it was still there. Taylor's chin lifted. "She's mine." Something moved through his expression. Not challenge, not anger, recalibration. "That's not what I meant." "I know what you meant." He looked at Zoe again. Zoe, unbothered, was sketching. Taylor watched Daeon watch her daughter and felt something complicated move through her chest that she had no interest in examining. "Her name," he said quietly. "Zoe." He said it once, to himself, barely audible. like he was learning the shape of something he had always been supposed to know. Taylor tightened her grip on the burnt orange folder. I came here for a meeting about a licensing dispute. That is what I'm here for. Whatever else you think this. The dispute is suspended. Simple, already decided. As of this afternoon. Taylor stared at him. You can't just... I can. No arrogance, just fact. The fact of a man who had been making unilateral decisions for 14 years and had never once needed to apologize for it. I'm offering you a consulting contract. Instead, creative direction for the Yoon Group's Cultural Heritage Initiative. 12 weeks minimum. The terms will be delivered to your hotel by 6 this evening. I don't want a consulting contract. I want the dispute resolved. I want it on record that every concept in that collection was, I know, quiet, certain. I know it was yours. She stopped. He held her gaze steadily. Something in it that was not quite an apology and not quite a promise, but lived in the space between the two. Read the contract before you decide. She read it that evening while Zoe slept, small and warm in the center of the hotel bed, one hand tucked under her chin. Taylor sat at the desk by the window, with Seoul glittering 40 floors below, and the contract open on her laptop and the burnt orange folder she hadn't needed after all sitting untouched beside it. The terms were extraordinary. The fee alone was more than she made in 2 years. Full creative autonomy, her name on every piece. International distribution through the Yoon Group's retail network across 12 countries. And a clause, added deliberately, she was certain, because nothing in a document like this was accidental, that explicitly confirmed sole ownership of all design concepts, past and present. That clause was not standard. Her phone buzzed. Caleb. How did it go? Did they back down? Taylor looked at the contract, looked at Zoe, looked at Seoul spread out below her like a city that had been waiting for her to return and deal with the thing she had been avoiding. Still processing, she typed back. Talk tomorrow. She stared at the contract for another hour. The practical part of her brain ran the numbers, mapped the exposure, calculated what this could do for her brand. The other part, the part she had spent 6 years disciplining into silence, kept returning to the way Da-on had said Zoe's name to himself in that emptied boardroom. Barely audible. Like a man learning something. He had always been supposed to know. She picked up the pen they had included. Heavy, considered, the kind of pen that came with documents meant to matter. And she signed it. She told herself it was the money, the exposure, the ownership clause. She was a very good liar. She had years of practice. Hi besties, welcome to Afro-Korean Series channel. Thanks for giving this story a chance. We love you. Now, back to the story. She met Seo Yoona 3 days later. It happened in the Yoon Group's 42nd floor atrium, a wide, light-filled space with a living wall of plants along one side and a view of the Han River on the other. Taylor was waiting for Dion's assistant to confirm a meeting room when the elevator opened and a woman walked out who made the entire space rearrange itself around her. Yoona was beautiful, the way certain things were beautiful. Precise, considered, nothing out of place. She wore a pink luxury suit and moved through the atrium with the ease of a woman who had never once felt uncertain about whether she belonged somewhere. She saw Taylor and smiled. It was a perfect smile, the kind that reached the eyes and communicated warmth and gave away absolutely nothing. You must be Ms. Andre. She extended her hand. I'm Seo Yoona. I've heard so much about your work. Taylor shook her hand. Thank you. Da-on speaks very highly of the Cultural Heritage Initiative. A small pause. Perfectly natural, perfectly placed. He's been quite focused on it lately. The elevator opened again, and Da-on stepped out, his assistant behind him with a tablet. He saw Yoona first, a small, contained adjustment in his expression. And then he saw Taylor, and something else moved across his face entirely, there and gone before she could name it. Yoona turned toward him and placed her hand on his arm with the ease of long familiarity. Dayon did not move away, did not pull her closer. His eyes moved to Taylor with an expression she could not read and was not sure she wanted to. "Ms. Andre," he said. "Ready?" "Yes," Taylor said. She followed him down the corridor and did not look back at Una. She didn't need to. She could feel the weight of that perfect smile on the back of her neck all the way to the meeting room. 2 weeks into the consulting contract, Taylor stopped pretending the work wasn't the best she had ever done. The Cultural Heritage Initiative was exactly the kind of project she had been building toward her whole career. A collection sitting at the intersection of Korean and African design traditions, telling a story about craft and legacy and the way beautiful things crossed borders without losing themselves. Dayon gave her access to the Yoon Group's archive of traditional Korean metalwork and textile patterns, centuries of craft documented in careful detail. She brought her grandmother's techniques, the ones that started with the story and let the metal follow. What emerged in her sketchbook in those first 2 weeks was something she had never made before. Dayon reviewed her work every Tuesday and Thursday. He was not an easy audience. He asked sharp questions and expected sharp answers and had no patience for being told what he wanted to hear. Taylor gave him exactly what she had, her real thinking, her actual vision, no performance, and watched something shift in his expression on those days, in a way she noticed and chose not to examine. He was different in those meetings than he was everywhere else. Still controlled, still exact. But there were moments, a question that went somewhere unexpected, a response that revealed more than he intended, when she saw the man from the hotel bar inside the chairman. The one who had laughed at himself. The one who had stayed until the bar closed because neither of them wanted to be the one to leave first. She noticed. She kept her face neutral and her thoughts to herself. Zoe had developed her own relationship with the Yoon Group building that Taylor had not sanctioned and could not seem to stop. She accompanied Taylor on days when the after-school program, arranged quietly by Dayon, about which Taylor had spent 20 furious minutes before conceding it was exactly what she needed, finished early. She would settle wherever space was available with her sketchbook and draw with the intense focus of a child who had inherited her mother's relationship with making things. Dayon's assistant, a quiet, efficient woman named Park Ji-soo, had taken to setting up a small space for Zoe at the end of her desk without being asked. Taylor had noticed. She had not said thank you because saying thank you meant acknowledging that she had needed the help. Dayon noticed Zoe every time. Taylor watched him notice and say nothing and return to whatever he was doing. She watched him recalibrate his path through a room to pass closer to where Zoe was sitting. She watched him pause once over Zoe's shoulder to look at what she was drawing, the Yoon Group tower surrounded by cherry blossoms, rendered in the careful detail of a child who looked at things closely. And she watched something move across his face that had no name in any language she spoke. He did not reach out, did not speak, just looked and moved on, and carried it with him. It was a Thursday evening, the building mostly emptied, Taylor staying late to finish a concept sketch that had been pulling at her all day. She surfaced eventually, blinking, and went looking for Zoe. Park Ji-soo's desk was empty for the evening. A note sat on the keyboard in neat handwriting. Finished for the evening. Zoe is with Mr. Yoon. She asked to show him her drawings. He said yes. Taylor stared at the note for a moment longer than necessary. Then she walked to Dayon's office. The door was ajar. She pushed it open. Dayon was sitting on the floor, not at his desk, not at the long meeting table. On the floor, his back against the sofa, jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbow, his entire controlled and exact and uninterruptible presence arranged on the carpet beside a 6-year-old girl who was showing him her sketchbook page by page with the seriousness of someone presenting work they were proud of. He was listening, not with the polite half-attention of an adult humoring a child, with his whole body turned toward her, his eyes moving across each page, asking questions in the quiet way he asked questions when he actually wanted to know the answer. Zoe said something Taylor couldn't hear from the doorway. Dayon looked at the page, said something low and considered, and Zoe laughed, a real laugh, the delighted, unself-conscious kind. And Dayon looked at her laughing face with an expression of such unguarded, terrified, absolute tenderness that Taylor's chest did something she was completely unprepared for. He was already gone for her, already completely, quietly gone in the way of someone who had not chosen it and did not know what to do with it and was doing it anyway. He did not know Taylor was there. She stood in the doorway and let herself see it. The billionaire chairman on the floor of his own office, undone by a 6-year-old with a sketchbook, not performing a single thing, and felt the wall she had been maintaining with considerable discipline develop a crack she was not sure she could repair. She was not falling. That was what she told herself, back against the wall of the corridor, hand pressed flat against her sternum. She had a consulting contract and a 6-year-old, and 6 years of evidence that opening herself up to this particular man led nowhere good. She had Caleb's voice in her head. You deserve better. You've always deserved better. And every reason in the world to keep the distance she had worked hard to maintain. She was absolutely falling. She pushed off the wall, smoothed her expression into something manageable, and knocked on the open door. Dayon looked up. The tenderness shuttered. The control came back, but not fast enough. She had seen it. They both knew she had seen it. Sorry to interrupt. Her voice was steady. She was getting very good at steady. Time to go, Zoe. Zoe looked up with the expression of a child who had been having an excellent time and felt strongly about the timing of its interruption. 5 more minutes. Now, baby. Dawn rose from the floor in one smooth movement, and Taylor suddenly understood why his boardroom cleared without argument. He was taller than she remembered, or maybe the hotel bar had made him smaller somehow, more human, more reachable. In this office, with the evening light coming sideways through the glass and Zoe chattering about noodles between them, the distance between him and Taylor was the kind that had a pulse. She was aware of his hands, the rolled sleeves, the way he had been sitting on the floor of his own office like a man who had forgotten, briefly, that he was supposed to be untouchable. He was looking at her mouth, just once, just for a fraction of a second, that he clearly had not intended to give away. Then his eyes came back up and held hers with the controlled steadiness of a man who was very good at pretending he hadn't just done that. She's talented, he said quietly. I know, Taylor said. The air between them had the quality of a conversation happening, underneath the one they were having out loud. Neither of them moved toward it. Neither of them moved away. Then Zoe announced she was hungry, and could they please get the noodles from the place with the green sign, and the moment broke cleanly, and Taylor exhaled something she had been holding since the doorway. She shepherded Zoe toward the door, stopped, turned back. Dayon was still standing in the center of his office watching them go, with an expression he had not yet managed to put away. Good night, Mr. Yoon, she said. Good night, Miss Andre, he said. She walked to the elevator with Zoe's hand in hers, and soul darkening outside the glass walls, and something she had spent 6 years keeping sealed opening slowly in her chest, whether she was ready for it or not. She was not ready. She was going to have to be. CO Yuna requested a private meeting on a Tuesday, not through Dayon, not through his assistant. A handwritten note delivered to Taylor's temporary studio on the 38th floor slipped under the door sometime between 8 and 9 in the morning, while Taylor was getting coffee. Cream cardstock, precise handwriting, a time and a location. A private dining room in the Yoon Group's hospitality floor, 12:30, lunch provided. No question mark, no if you're available. Just the facts, arranged with the confidence of a woman who did not anticipate being declined. Taylor turned the note over in her hands for a long moment, then she put it down and went back to her sketches. She went at 12:30. The private dining room was everything the rest of the Yoon Group building was, restrained, considered, expensive in the way that didn't need to announce itself. A table set for 2. banchan arranged in small ceramic dishes, a window overlooking the Han River, grey and wide and moving slowly under an overcast sky. Yuna was already seated. She rose when Taylor entered, with the easy grace of a woman who had been raised to make other people feel welcomed into spaces she controlled. "Ms. Andre, thank you for coming." She gestured to the opposite chair. "Please." Taylor sat. A server appeared, poured tea, disappeared. Yuna lifted her cup with both hands in the Korean style, and Taylor noted it and said nothing. They talked about the food first, then about Taylor's work. Yuna was genuinely knowledgeable, which Taylor had not expected and which made her more careful rather than less. Then, with the seamless transition of a woman who had been steering conversations her entire life, Yuna set down her cup and folded her hands on the table, and looked at Taylor with an expression of such warm, clear-eyed directness that Taylor's shoulders tightened before a single word was spoken. "I want to be honest with you," Yuna said, "because I think you're a woman who appreciates honesty." "I am," Taylor said. "Dayon and I have been formally engaged for 11 months. She said it the way you stated facts, not to wound, just to establish the ground they were standing on. What we have is not simply personal. There are families involved, obligations built over decades, things that do not dissolve easily." Taylor kept her face neutral. "I'm aware he's engaged. I know you are. Whatever you may be sensing from him, whatever he may be feeling, Dayon is not a free man. The weight of what he would have to dismantle to act on it is considerable. I just want you to understand that before you make any decisions." Yuna's voice was gentle, precise, the voice of a surgeon who wanted you to understand exactly what was happening before she made the incision. "You have a daughter, you have a life in Atlanta, a career that is genuinely remarkable. I'm not asking you to leave, I'm simply asking you to see clearly. The full picture." Taylor turned the phrase over in her mind. The full picture was a man sitting on the floor of his office with her daughter's sketchbook in his hands. The full picture was, "You have my face," said with the certainty of a 6-year-old who had never been taught to doubt herself. The full picture was 6 years of silence that Taylor had built a wall around, and Yuna was now very elegantly asking her to hide behind. She picked up her tea, took a sip, set it down. "Thank you for lunch," she said. "The banchan was excellent." Something shifted in Yuna's expression. Brief, controlled. She recovered immediately. "Of course," she said. "Any time." Taylor did not tell Dayon about the lunch. She told herself it was because it wasn't relevant. She told herself she was processing it. She told herself a lot of things over the following 3 days, while she sat across from Dayon in their Tuesday and Thursday meetings and gave him her full professional attention and kept everything else behind the wall that Yuna had very helpfully reminded her to maintain. Dayon noticed the shift. She could see him noticing the slight adjustment in how he looked at her, the question he started once and didn't finish, the way his eyes stayed on her face a beat longer than necessary when she was talking, like he was trying to read something she had stopped letting him see. He didn't ask. She didn't offer. They were both very professional about it. Caleb arrived on a Thursday. Taylor was in the lobby when he came through the doors of her hotel, rolling his carry-on, wearing the grey jacket he'd had for 4 years, and the easy smile that she had always found immediately reassuring. He opened his arms, and she walked into them, and let herself be held for a moment by the familiar weight of someone who had always shown up when she needed him. "How's my girl?" he said into her hair. "Tired," she said honestly. "Really tired." He pulled back and looked at her with the particular attention of someone who knew her face well. "You look good though. Seoul agrees with you." "Seoul is complicated. Seoul is almost over." He squeezed her shoulders. 3 more weeks and you're home. I've already got a strategy for the dispute resolution. We just need to—" "The dispute is suspended," Taylor said. "I'm on a consulting contract now." Caleb's hands stilled on her shoulders. Something moved through his expression. Quick, contained, gone before she could name it. Then the smile came back, easy and warm. He offered you a contract. 12 weeks, Cultural Heritage Initiative. It's good work, Caleb. Really good. I'm sure it is. He picked up his carry-on. Tell me everything over dinner. The call from Dayon came the next morning. Not his assistant, him directly. Taylor looked at the name on her screen for 2 full seconds before answering. I need to see you, he said. This morning, not a scheduled meeting. Come to my office. His voice had the quality it got when something had already been decided. Taylor had learned to read that quality over 6 weeks of Tuesday and Thursday meetings. It meant he had found something and was going to tell her whether she was ready or not. She told Caleb she had an early meeting. She left him at the hotel breakfast table with his coffee and his easy smile and took a cab to the Yoon Group Tower. Dayon was standing when she arrived, not at his desk. At the window, Sol spread out below him in the flat morning light, his hands in his pockets and his back to the door. He turned when she came in and looked at her for a moment before he spoke. Sit down, Taylor. It was the first time he had used her first name. She sat. He came away from the window and placed a single flagged page on the table in front of her. No preamble, no building to it. My legal team found something in the dispute filing. The claim was filed through a consulting firm. A pause. The firm belongs to Caleb Moore. The room was very quiet. Taylor looked at the name on the page. Caleb Moore. In clean black type on a legal document that smelled like fresh ink, and the end of something she had not been prepared to lose. That's not possible, she said. Her voice was calm. She was very good at calm. Taylor. He's been my... She stopped, started again. He has been in my corner for 8 years. He found me at a craft fair when nobody knew my name. He brought me the Soul Commission. He has been handling the legal response to this dispute from Atlanta, this entire... She heard herself, stopped again. Dayon was watching her with the careful stillness of a man who understood that she needed to get there herself and was not going to rush her. He told me the clause was standard, she said quietly. He drafted the clause. Dayon held her gaze. He wrote it into your original contract 6 years ago. He has been monetizing your designs through his firm for 2 years. The dispute was filed when he needed legal cover for the licensing arrangements he'd already made. Taylor sat with that. The room was very quiet. Sol moved outside the window, indifferent and enormous, and she sat in the middle of it feeling the ground shift under her feet in a way that had nothing to do with the city. I need you to understand that I'm telling you this because you deserve to know, Dayon said. Not to... He stopped. Something moved through his expression. The corporate instinct was there. She could see it, the impulse to manage this, to frame it carefully, to handle it in the way that protected the most people from the most damage. The Yoon Group's legal team will be filing a counter-complaint against his firm, regardless of what you decide to do. That's already in motion. There it was, the management. The this is already handled of a man who processed everything through the machinery of control. Taylor looked at him. Is that what this is? You're informing me as a courtesy because your legal team is already moving? No. Immediate. No, that's not... He stopped again, pressed his fingers briefly to the bridge of his nose in a gesture she had never seen from him before. Something genuinely unguarded, a crack in the precision. I'm telling you because he's been stealing from you, and because I think he's been doing other things that I can't prove yet, but... He stopped. What things? Taylor said. Dayon looked at her for a long moment. 6 years ago, when you left Seoul. A pause that had weight. Did you try to reach me? The question landed like a stone dropped in still water. Taylor felt the ripples move through her and kept her face very still. Why are you asking me that? Because I need to know. She looked at him, at this man who had given her 6 years of silence and then restructured a legal dispute into a consulting contract and sat on his office floor with her daughter and looked at her mouth when he thought she wasn't, watching. She looked at him and made a decision. Once, she said, I sent one message, to the number you gave me. She kept her voice even. You didn't respond. Something happened in Dae-on's face that she did not have words for. I never received it, he said. The room was very, very quiet. She did not go back to the hotel immediately. She walked. Seoul in the late morning was loud and layered and completely unbothered by the fact that her entire understanding of the last 6 years was rearranging itself with every step. She walked until she found a small park near the river and sat on a bench and watched a child feed pigeons with careful fairness and let the city move around her until she was ready to move again. Then she stood up and went back to the hotel. Caleb was in the hotel lobby at 2 o'clock exactly. He saw her face when she came through the doors, and something shifted in his, quick, almost imperceptible, the adjustment of a man recalibrating. But he held the smile. He was very good at holding the smile. You look serious, he said. Sit down, Caleb. They sat in 2 chairs near the window, Seoul traffic moving beyond the glass. Taylor placed her phone on the table between them, screen down. Tell me about your consulting firm, she said. The smile didn't drop. That was the thing she would remember later. How long he held the smile. Like if he held it long enough, the ground might not open up under him. Taylor, the one that filed the dispute against me, she said, using a clause you wrote into my original contract. She kept her voice level. Tell me. The smile finally went. What replaced it was something she had never seen on Caleb's face before, something stripped back and raw and complicated in the way of a person who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had just been relieved of the option of continuing to carry it. It wasn't, he stopped. It started as protection. I wanted to make sure I had... You wanted to make sure you had leverage, Taylor said. I wanted to make sure you didn't outgrow me. The words came out quiet and undefended, and she understood in that moment that this was the most honest thing he had ever said to her. You were getting bigger, the wait list, the editorials, that retailer who contacted you directly in November. You didn't even tell me about it for 2 weeks. 2 weeks, Taylor. You used to call me the same day. She looked at him. I built you, he said. The rawness was fully exposed now. I found you. I brought you soul. Everything you have started with me believing in you when you didn't believe in yourself. And you were just... His jaw tightened. You were just going to hand my role to some business manager you hadn't even met yet. So you filed a legal dispute against me? I filed it to bring you back. His voice was rough now. To remind you that you still needed me. That's all it was supposed to. You deleted my message. Her voice was very quiet. 6 years ago, the message I sent to Dae-on. The silence that followed was complete. Caleb said nothing. Taylor reached for her phone, opened it, went to the cloud backup account linked to her old device, the one she had stopped using after Zoe was born, the account she had never thought to check because she had assumed the silence was its own answer. The password took 3 tries. She searched, found it. The messaging app had been set to auto-backup to cloud storage, a default setting neither of them had known about or thought to disable. The message was there, complete, time-stamped 6 years, 2 months, and 11 days ago. Never delivered, never deleted from the backup because Caleb hadn't known the backup existed. The preview showed the first line. I know this is strange. I know we said one night. She set the phone on the table between them, face up. Caleb looked at it. He looked at it for a long time. I didn't even know I was pregnant when I sent that, she said quietly. I reached out because I wanted to, not because I needed anything from him, just because I couldn't stop thinking about him. She looked at Caleb steadily. You knew that. That's why it scared you. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. You deleted it, she said. You came back from Seoul different, he said finally. His voice was rough now, scraped down to something unvarnished. You were glowing. You wouldn't tell me what happened. You just had this thing about you that wasn't there before, and then you were pregnant, and you still wouldn't tell me who, and I knew it was whoever you'd met there, and He looked up at her. I just needed it to not exist. I needed you to come back to who you were before you went. Taylor looked at the man she had called her person for 8 years. She looked at him clearly, without the years of trust softening the edges, and she saw exactly what he was. A man who had loved her in the way that wanted to own the thing it claimed to cherish. Get out of Seoul, she said. Taylor, today. Her voice was steady and final and had no anger in it, which she understood was worse than anger. Book a flight today, and Caleb. She picked up her phone. My lawyers will be in touch about your firm. She stood up. He reached for her arm. Don't. One word, quiet as a closed door. He let go. She walked across the lobby and into the elevator and stood in the mirrored interior as the doors closed and let herself feel the full weight of 8 years dismantling itself in the span of 20 minutes. She did not cry. She pressed the button for her floor and stood straight and breathed. She was done surviving things alone. She just needed to figure out what came next. Taylor sat in her hotel room for a long time after Caleb left. Zoe was at the Korean pottery class she had declared her favorite thing in Seoul, and the room was very quiet. Taylor sat on the edge of the bed and did not call anyone, did not reach for her sketchbook, did not do the thing she always did when something hurt, which was to make something beautiful out of it immediately. She just sat, let it be what it was. 8 years, dismantled in 20 minutes, by a man who had loved her in the way that needed her smaller than she was. She sat with it until it stopped feeling like loss and started feeling like relief. It took a while. That was okay. Her phone rang at 9 that evening, a number she didn't recognize. A journalist from a Korean entertainment outlet, polite and professional, and asking for comment on a story running at midnight. A story about Yoon Dae-yeon's illegitimate child. A story with Zoe's name in it. Taylor's blood went cold. She hung up without commenting. Called Dae-yeon immediately. He answered before the second ring. She told him. The silence on his end lasted exactly 3 seconds. Where is Zoe? Asleep, here with me. Don't open the door to anyone, I'll handle this. His voice had the quality she had come to know. The thing already decided, the machinery already moving. But underneath it was something else entirely. Something that was not corporate management at all. Something that had Zoe's name in it and would not be reasoned with. She heard him handle it. Not through her, through his people, his lawyers, his network. She sat on the edge of the hotel bed and listened to Zoe breathing in the dark and waited. The story was suppressed within the hour. What she found out the next morning, from Park Ji-soo, who told her with the careful neutrality of a woman relaying information she understood was significant, was that Seo Yoona had been the source. The journalist had been traced through Da-on's media legal team. The tip had come from a private email address registered to a shell account, but the metadata pointed to a device registered to the SEO family's communications network. Da-on's team had been thorough. They always were. The Yoon Group's annual cultural dinner was that same evening. Taylor had been on the guest list for 3 weeks as the creative director of the Heritage Initiative. She had planned to attend professionally, leave early, keep her distance from everything that had happened in the last 48 hours. She arrived to find the room already configured around a tension she could feel from the entrance. Both families present. The board, partners. The particular charged atmosphere of a room full of powerful people who knew something was about to happen and were waiting to see what shape it took. Dae-yeon found her within 2 minutes of her arrival. He appeared at her shoulder without announcement, and she watched a senior executive she didn't recognize approach her with the particular confidence of a man about to introduce himself to an attractive woman at a business event, and then watch that confidence recalibrate completely as Dae-yeon turned to look at him. Dae-yeon said nothing. did not move toward the man, did not gesture or speak. He simply turned and looked at him with the quiet, absolute stillness of someone communicating something that required no words whatsoever. The executive smiled, redirected, and found somewhere else to be. Dawn turned back to Taylor. "Was that necessary?" she said. "Yes," he said simply. Then quieter, close enough that only she could hear. "Stay close." Not a request, not quite an order. Something in between that her body responded to before her mind had finished processing it. She stayed. What happened next, she watched from 2 feet away. Una arrived on her father's arm, wine dress suit and composed, and moved through the room with the ease of a woman who had choreographed this evening in her mind many times. She found Daon with her eyes across the room, and moved toward him with the unhurried confidence of 11 months of formal arrangement. Daon stepped forward, not toward her, into the center of the room, into the particular geography of a space where everyone could see him clearly. He did not raise his voice. He did not perform. He spoke in Korean first and then in English, his eyes finding Taylor briefly as he shifted languages, making sure she would not miss a word. With the quiet, absolute authority of a man who had decided something and was simply stating it as fact. "I want to be direct with everyone here tonight." His eyes moved around the room, steady, clear. "The arrangement between the Iyun family and the SEO family is concluded. That decision is mine, and it is final." A pause. "Taylor Andre is the mother of my daughter. She is also one of the most gifted designers I have encountered in 20 years of working in this industry. She deserves to be introduced to this room as both of those things, without conditions and without negotiation." The room was completely silent. Una stood very still in the center of it. Her father's hand was on her arm. Her face was a masterpiece of controlled composure that cost her everything visible to anyone paying attention. She had done everything right. She had been patient and strategic and perfectly positioned. She had lost anyway, not to someone who tried harder, but to someone who simply existed, who had walked into a boardroom with a child and changed everything without even trying. Una set down her glass, excused herself from her father's side with the composure of a woman who would not give this room the satisfaction of watching her break. She walked to the exit without hurrying. She did not look back at Daon. She did not look at Taylor. She simply left, taking with her 11 months of careful strategy and 3 years of quiet love, and the particular dignity of a woman who knew when something was over. Taylor watched her go and felt the almost sorry harden into something cleaner. Respect, maybe, the reluctant kind. Daon found her on the terrace an hour later. The dinner had continued. These things always continued, the machinery of events too large to stop for individual reckonings. And Taylor had stepped outside for air and found Sol spread out below her in the night, enormous and lit and completely indifferent to everything that had happened in the last 48 hours. She heard him before she saw him, the particular quality of his footsteps, even deliberate, the walk of a man who had already mapped every space he entered. He came to stand beside her at the railing, not close enough to touch, close enough to feel. They stood in silence for a moment. Below them, Sol breathed and moved and went about its business. "The message," Daon said, "the one you sent. You don't have to—" "I stood in front of your display case," he said, "in my own department store, the capsule collection. I stood there for longer than I'm going to tell you and felt something I couldn't name." He was looking at the city. "I didn't know it was yours. I hadn't connected it yet. I just knew that whatever I was feeling had been there since the night at the bar, and I had been telling myself for 6 years that I imagined it." Taylor said nothing. "You didn't disappear," he said quietly. "I thought you had. I thought you looked at what happened between us and decided it wasn't worth—" He stopped. "You tried." "I tried," she said. He turned to look at her then. The city light caught the planes of his face, and he was looking at her with the expression she had first seen in the boardroom, that vast, cracked open, thing moving behind the control. Except this time he wasn't trying to put it away. I have been falling since the first meeting, where you told me my instinct about the metalwork finish was wrong, he said. And you were right, and you didn't soften it at all. Something moved through his expression that was almost a smile. You just told me. Taylor looked at him. At this man who had cleared a boardroom and suspended a legal dispute, and sat on the floor with her daughter's sketchbook, and stood up in a room full of powerful people, and said her name out loud, without conditions. Da-on, she said. Yes. I'm not good at this. She held his gaze. I have spent 6 years being very good at not needing anything from anyone. I'm not going to suddenly be easy. I know, he said. I don't want easy. Zoe comes first. Always. I know that too. His voice was quiet and certain, and had no performance in it. She told me last Wednesday that my building needed more color. She's not wrong. Taylor laughed. It came out before she could calculate whether she should, the real kind, unguarded and unperformed. And she watched Dion look at her laughing face with the same expression she had seen in the office doorway. The absolute, unguarded, terrified tenderness of a man who had not chosen this and was completely gone in it. She stopped laughing. The air between them shifted. He reached up and touched her face, just his fingertips, just the edge of her jaw, the lightest possible contact, asking a question without words. She answered it by not moving away. His forehead came down to rest against hers. They stood like that in the Seoul night, the city enormous around them, the dinner continuing inside. Everything that had happened in the last 6 years sitting quietly between them like something that had finally been set down. I have a daughter, he said softly, against her temple. Like he was still learning the shape of it, like he would probably be learning it for a long time. You have a daughter, Taylor said. She's going to be a handful. She already is. The almost smile again. Warmer now. She gets it from her mother. Taylor pulled back just enough to look at him. His hand was still at her jaw. His eyes were on hers with the steady, unguarded attention of a man who had stopped managing and was just present. Just here. Just choosing this. She kissed him. It was not a tentative thing. It was not a question. It was 6 years of a sealed room finally opened. 2 people finding each other on the other side of every wrong turn, an intercepted message, and misread silence. And it tasted like the end of surviving alone. He kissed her back like she was something he had been afraid to want, and had finally decided to stop being afraid of. When they finally separated, the city was still there. Indifferent, and enormous, and beautiful. Your building does need more color, Taylor said against his mouth. Dawn laughed. Real laugh, unguarded, unperformed. The laugh of a man who had forgotten he knew how. She felt it against her lips, and stored it somewhere she intended to keep. 3 weeks later, on an ordinary Friday evening, Taylor sat at the desk in Daeon's apartment, with her sketchbook open and Seoul darkening outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. Her grandmother's tools were spread across the surface, the burnishing rod, the forming hammer, the small leather pad, worn soft with years of use. She was working on the final piece for the Heritage Collection. The one that had been pulling at her for weeks, the one she hadn't been able to finish until now. It was a pendant, 2 metals, Korean silver and West African gold, worked together in a technique that shouldn't have been possible but was, because she had spent 3 weeks figuring out how to make it so. The design moved the way good jewelry moved, like it had always existed, and she had simply found it. From the other room, she could hear Daeon reading to Zoe. This had become a thing, not arranged, not discussed, just accumulated into the fabric of evenings the way good things did. Daeon had bought 3 books before he understood that Zoe had opinions about books, then taken her to the bookstore and let her spend 45 minutes selecting 7 that she deemed acceptable. He had reported this to Taylor afterward with the expression of a man who had been thoroughly managed by a 6-year-old and found it to be the best 45 minutes he'd spent in recent memory. Zoe had told Taylor privately that Dayon's reading voices needed work, but that he was a good listener, which she considered more important. Taylor had agreed. She set down her burnishing rod and listened to his voice, low and even, Zoe occasionally interrupting with questions he answered, with the patience of a man who had discovered, somewhat to his own surprise, that he had infinite patience for exactly this. She was not surviving. She was not managing. She was not maintaining the careful distance of a woman who had decided that needing things led to losing things. She was just here, present, chosen. Not because circumstances had arranged it, not because a child had walked through a wrong door, but because she had looked at a man sitting on the floor of his own office, with her daughter's sketchbook in his hands, and decided quietly and finally that she was done being afraid of what she wanted. Dayon appeared in the doorway, sleeves rolled up, tie gone, the controlled, exact, uninterruptible chairman entirely absent, replaced by something quieter and more real. "She's asking for you," he said. "She says I read the voices wrong." "You probably do." "I definitely do." He looked at her work on the desk, at the pendant. Something moved through his expression, the particular quality he got when her work did something to him that he didn't have words for yet. "That's the one," he said quietly. "I know," Taylor said. She capped her tools and stood up and walked past him toward Zoe's room, and as she passed him his hand found hers, brief, certain, the touch of a man who had stopped being careful about what he wanted, and she let him hold it for a moment before she kept walking. Behind her she heard him exhale, quiet and complete, the sound of a man who had been holding something for a very long time and had finally, simply, put it down. She knew the feeling. The end. If this story found you at the right moment, I'm glad. And if you want to hear more, you know where to find me. Thank you for listening all the way through. I'd love to hear what you think of this story.